Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating theological framework drawn from the work of James B. Jordan. We're going to explore a perspective that pretty much directly challenges almost everything modern science tells us about how the universe operates. It's a profound deep dive into how the divine interacts with the mundane, and honestly, it might just completely reframe how you see the everyday world around you.
Let's just dive right into it. What if gravity, the weather, and the sunrise aren't run by some giant, impersonal, wound-up cosmic clock? What if instead, the very fabric of our reality is governed by the deeply personal, continuous actions of God and his angels? Now, I know that sounds radical today, but as our source material outlines, this is actually the purely biblical view of reality.
To thoroughly understand this massive paradigm shift, we'll trace the source's arguments through 6 key areas: word and sign, the myth of natural law, defining a miracle, the wonders of providence, the history of miracles, and finally, miracles today. All right, kicking things off with the foundation of this entire worldview. Section 1, word and sign, verbal and sensible. So the source here really hammers home this concept called bipolarity. Basically, according to the text, verbal revelation, like a spoken word or a command, is never, ever separated from a visible, sensible sign. Think about the big biblical narratives for a second. When God gave a promise to Abraham, it wasn't just words. It was immediately paired with the physical, sensible sign of circumcision. When Noah heard the promise that the earth wouldn't flood again, it was paired with the highly visible rainbow. The word and the sign, they absolutely always travel together. Moving right along to Section 2, the myth of natural law, God's active hand. Think about this. If you ask most people today to define a miracle, they'll probably tell you it's an exception to the laws of physics. The modern deistic view argues that God built these natural laws into the universe, kind of like winding up a clock, and then just stepped back, only occasionally reaching in to break his own rules. But our source pushes back incredibly hard against this idea. Here's the wild part. According to this framework, impersonal natural law is a complete myth. It literally does not exist. The text argues that God and his angels personally and actively govern every single tiny detail. So when you drop a watch, it doesn't fall because of an impersonal, invisible force called gravity. It falls because divine agents are actively pulling it down. Therefore, a miracle isn't an exception to a physical law because there are no physical laws. It is merely a covenant irregularity. It's just an exception to the regular rhythm we've come to expect. It's just God deciding to do things differently for a moment. Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, defining a miracle, beyond the rules. If a miracle isn't a broken rule of physics, what actually is it? Well, the text breaks down 3 distinct Greek terms to give us a complete definition. First up is dunamos. You might recognize that one. It's actually where we get the English word dynamite. This word shows us that an extraordinary event is always an active manifestation of incredible raw power. It reminds us that the divine holds ultimate control over every single atom in creation. Next, we've got semeion, which translates to a sign or a revelation. Basically, this tells us these aren't just random flashy flexes of cosmic power. They are highly authoritative signs pointing to a specific truth. They authenticate a message, serving as a sort of physical guarantee of a spoken doctrine like the resurrection. And this third one brilliantly completes the picture. Teros. Yep, that is the root of our word terror. It means awe-inspiring. Terror shows us that when the divine draws specially near, actively breaking the normal routine, it naturally and rightfully arouses awe, wonder, and even a bit of fear in anyone who witnesses it. Now, what I find absolutely fascinating here is that even when these specific Greek words aren't explicitly used in a text, the 3-part concept remains perfectly clear. The source points to 1 Kings 17, where the prophet Elijah raises a widow's child from the dead. None of those specific miracle words are used in that passage, yet it functions exactly as a miracle should. It is a visible, sensible testimony of power that authentically seals the spoken word of the prophet. But what about when things are just normal, when God operates without that sudden shock and awe? That brings us to Section 4, the wonders of providence, the daily miracles. When the universe is running exactly as we expect it to, the source calls this providence, and it operates personally through 3 mechanisms. First, the preservation of creation, literally keeping things in existence moment to moment. Second, the government of all outcomes, actively steering history. And third, concurrence. This is huge. Concurrence means God is eternally active, working simultaneously in every single event that happens, from a massive weather system down to the electrons orbiting an atom.
The text points to ancient songs, specifically Psalms 107 and 136, to make a pretty bold claim. Biblically, there is no sharp black and white distinction between a miracle and providence. Surviving a terrifying storm at sea is considered just as much a divine wonder as the Red Sea physically parting. They are exactly the same type of personal divine action. They only differ in their degree of extraordinariness. Both of them are absolute wonders.
All right, let's zoom out a bit for Section 5, the history of miracles, eras of shock value. We really need to see how this built historically, because as the source notes, miracles aren't just evenly sprinkled throughout the biblical timeline. They actually happen in these massive, distinct clusters. The source maps out 3 great periods: the era of Moses, the era of Elijah and Elisha, and the New Testament era with Christ and the apostles. These clusters definitely weren't random. They were deployed specifically as a shock value tactic to break through human suppression of the truth and to powerfully establish a brand new phase of redemptive history.
But here's the kicker. Once that new phase is established, those miracles are meant to fade into normal daily life. A perfect example of this normalization is the manna in the wilderness. Think about it. Day 1, it was a mind-blowing, astonishing miracle. But after 38 years of it appearing on the ground every single morning, the extraordinary simply became the daily expected providence. It just became breakfast. The miracle established the new normal.
Which logically brings us to our final part, Section 6. Where are miracles today?
So if they are clustered in history, what on earth happened to the shock value miracles of Moses, Elijah, and the apostles in our modern era? Well, according to the framework in our text, because the foundational written word of those eras is now finished, we have entered a long period of normalcy. We aren't waiting for new explosive redemptive phases. Therefore, the physical sacraments, like baptism and communion, now act as the exact modern equivalent of those biblical miracles. They serve as the necessary, sensible, physical signs paired with the spoken word for our era today.
As we wrap up today's explainer, I want you to consider this massive shift in perspective. If impersonal natural law is indeed a total myth, and if the divine is personally, actively concurring with every single atom, drop of rain, and gust of wind, does that change how you see the world? The next time you watch the sunrise or see a storm roll in, ask yourself, are you just watching a mechanical clock tick away, or are you actually witnessing a continuous, deeply personal daily wonder?